Good morning, Glue Troopers. I was thinking about this GB Racer and Doolittle's aircraft, and I think, hey, wait a minute, I got a B-25 on the shelf also, but one of you wonderful folks gave me this B-25J, but of course Doolittle's guys were famous for the B-25C for the Doolittle mission, and I was realizing, you know, you watch a lot of movies, one of the worst offenders being the recent production of Midway, and they frequently get this wrong. Now, there aren't, I don't know if there's any C model B-25 still flying. Of course, they were all CGI in the movie, but, well, not the ones the actors are in front of, but the ones when you saw them flying. But, quick note, you'll notice that the gun turret, the top turret on this airplane is up near the cockpit. And most B-25s are that way, but the early models, including the, I believe it was the B model that they were using on the mission, the Doolittle mission, those have the turret back near the waist gun position in the aft of the aircraft. Because usually, often the flight, a lot of times on these old bombers, the top turret gunner was also the flight engineer, and this way you were closer to the crew. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think top turret was a standard position for flight engineers, so you had to be a mechanic and a gunner. Those guys are probably the most highly trained enlisted men on the aircraft. But, and I was doing a little more research on the GB. It's an airplane that intrigues me and terrifies me, and I think it terrifies most people. Good Lord. You know, a lot of the race pilots back in the 20s and 30s, they built their own airplanes. I mean, or at least were involved in the design of them. Roscoe Turner had helped design the Meteor, I actually met Matty Laird, who designed the Laird Super Solution, the Solution Super Solution, a few other planes, and he made him 1977 Lakeland fly-in, and he was also there with an old pilot that had flown his race planes, and the pilot was in a wheelchair, but Matty was still getting around. He passed a few years later, but he was already elderly when I met him. But this is back when the EAA was still building their Laird Super Solution for the display, and it didn't have any skin on it, but the airframe was complete with the engine on it. I might have some pictures somewhere. So anyway, that was my little brush with aviation history. Got on other stuff, I got the parachute and everything attached to the rocket, so it's done. It's pretty much flight-ready hardware now. And speaking of space, there was something I wanted to talk about today that we touched on the other day, very briefly, and I think I covered this in some previous company history videos. But you know, even though I research these things, you still, over time, you kind of forget the niceties. The details get confused. So one of you had asked me, you said you'd gotten, when you were a kid, you'd gotten a model of the Starship, in a Star Trek Starship USS Enterprise from Aurora. And I think you mentioned you were up in Canada. Okay, and I said, yeah, that's a whole story, doesn't it? It might have been Orange Tabby that asked me about that. But so I brushed up on that this morning because I got me curious. Okay, so, and I hope I have this right. When Star Trek starts production in '66, two companies are interested in making the models. Of course, and by the way, I said NPC the other day, it was AMT. And Aurora. Now, real quick, only two Star Trek models were actually in production while the show was. That was the Enterprise and then the Klingon battlecruiser. Now, here's the cool part. As you guys may know, that Matt Jeffries, the famous Hollywood designer, designed the Starship and the Klingon ship. And in fact, when you see him crawling through little access tubes, they call them Jeffries tubes in the TV show all the time in honor of Matt Jeffries. Well, anyway, the Klingons had already been introduced, but you never actually see a Klingon ship until the third season. So Matt Jeffries designed the model, and AMT made the model and had it on the shelf, I believe, before the ship actually appeared in television. Now, Only three companies made Star Trek models during the run of the show. And that was, of course, the original AMT kits, the Enterprise, and a couple of years followed by the Klingon battlecruiser. Then Aurora, and I'm going to get to their involvement. And then a company, which I've done history on, by the way, KSM Midori, who did they did two different versions of the Starship Enterprise. Midori was always noted for sticking play value in their toys, so one of them, I think it was the big one, had like this weird propeller on the tail and a friction motor. But anyway, those are kind of sought after kits these days just for their rarity. And didn't look like a bad kit. Now, Midori didn't put theirs in production until '69, and it was not, it's on its own scale, own box art, it's a completely own thing, has nothing to do with the AMT kits. Now, Aurora's involvement. And Andy, if you see this and I'm making a mistake that you know of, let me know, but I think I have this right. AMT did not really have a presence, or a big one, outside the United States. They were not going to set up distribution internationally and everything for these kits. So Aurora leased the molds. So Aurora Canada and Aurora UK made the and believe then they had to modify the molds to have, say, Aurora, and they had to make a few little modifications. Basically, they I believe used actually, I don't know if they used AMT's molds or if they copied their molds, but they got the license from AMT. I don't know the actual production. I'm gonna assume that they just had either got the molds from AMT or had AMT shoot them for them, but I don't know. But anyway, so Aurora Canada and Aurora UK were distributing the Star Trek models, the Enterprise and the Klingon ship, or at least the Enterprise anyway. You know, I'm not sure if there was an. I think there was an Aurora Klingon. No, I got to go look that up. Anyway, so if you lived in the UK or Europe or Canada, you got the Aurora, which is basically the same kit, except Aurora did their own instructions, and Aurora was the ones I think that include the lighting kit for the little saucer section. And I believe the motors, and I don't know if AMT ever included a lighting kit, or at least not at that point. So those two models were in production while the show was still being made, in '66 and in '69. And of course, '69, the show went out of production. But the kits lived on. Now, there was I believe there were a lot of problems with the engine sagging, and I remember my brother, you know, maybe AMT did have a lighting kit in theirs, because I remember my brother had one that had a lighting kit, and those are the ones that had the real problem with the engine sagging. So they had to re-engineer that, so they made a second pressing. And the model sold really well. I say a second pressing, a second mold, or an improved mold. This is my understanding. I mean, I'm getting some of this from Star Trek websites and some of it from modeling websites, but I believe I have that right. So the Aurora kits were from the, I believe, from the second pressing. I don't know if Aurora ever sold the original one or not. And I seem to remember faintly that it had really short stubs for the pylons to go in, so there wasn't a lot for them to hold on. The later ones were much bigger, so they held on better. Well, anyway, you still see occasional originals for sale. They get a pretty penny, but they're still out there. You can still find one. So after the show went off the air, Aurora, which was already well known for figures, a few years after the show went off the air, the models were still selling pretty well, so Aurora decided to make the Mr. Spock figure. Now, it's my understanding that this is the one with Spock holding the phaser, shooting the three-headed snake. That's an Aurora original, and of course it was their forte, doing figures. And I believe when we talk about the four ships that Aurora made, oh, you know what? I think Aurora might have had both pressings, because they talk about the two Enterprises that Aurora made. So I think Aurora did have original and second pressing ones. So, but again, those were in Canada and UK. They were not allowed domestic U.S. distribution. They only distributed those overseas. But then when they did the Spock, that was theirs. And what happened was Aurora only dealt with Star Trek for 6 years, from 66 to 72, if the Star Trek website is correct, the Star Trek fan website. I think it's, I forget the name of it. But anyway, so again, because I'm sure I've confused you by this point, 66 AMT makes the first model Starship Enterprise. Aurora gets the rights to distribute sell the model outside the United States, Canada, and Aurora Canada and Aurora UK. Then a year or two later, they come up with a second pressing, which is an improved one. Wash, rinse, repeat. 69, Matt Jeffries designs a Klingon battle cruiser. AMT puts that in production. Aurora gets the rights to sell that overseas. Aurora UK, Aurora Canada. Although they use the AMT box art, they made their own instructions, their own decals, their own lighting kit, and the box was different dimensions. 69, show goes off the air. Those three kits, the two versions of the Enterprise and the one of the Klingon battle cruiser, stay in production. 72, Aurora makes the Star Trek figure where Spock's firing the phaser at the three-headed snake. But in 72, Aurora gets out of the Star Trek business. Now, Aurora could sell that kit anywhere because it was not an AMT kit. So AMT leases the mold from Aurora, and I think they eventually even bought it. And it stays in production for a long time. And that's kind of the story on the Aurora Star Trek models, as I understand it. If you guys have something to add to it, please let me know. Now, a quick side note, if you buy any of these kits from Aurora, and they're like weird colors, like bright green or something, Andy was telling me, and also I'd read this in some other sources, that of course Aurora was a business. They didn't throw product away. Plastic can be recycled. So sometimes if they had a plastic of a certain color that turned out that they didn't have a need for, into the hopper it went, and into the injectors it went. And they had a chain of models that forget which ones they were, that didn't sell, that were some interesting colors, I think some bright colors, and they wound up, okay, we're just going to use that to make these other kits. And so for a while there, you could get some Aurora kits in some pretty wild colors. Might have covered that in one of the Aurora files, I forget. I remember talking with Andy about that, but it makes sense. I mean, you don't just throw away all that styrene just because it's a weird color. And I wouldn't be shocked if he was talking about, they had the barrels that had the sprue with the leftover stuff, and you would just throw the unused styrene into the proper colored barrel, back in the hopper, melt it back down, you know, because it's styrene. It can be, you know, wash, rinse, repeat. So anyway. Well, guys, that's pretty much everything for today. Hope you're having a wonderful morning. And probably nothing tonight. We got all kinds of big grown-up stuff we have to do today. So I'll see you when I see you. Guys, take care and model on. Da, 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 da. Catch that dream of Genie reference. Aurora does make its, although they use the MPC 66, MPC makes the Starship Enterprise. It's got AMT. God, why do I keep saying MPC? MPC's got a lot of the Star Wars stuff years later. Maybe I should do this on my second cup of coffee. So 66 MPC. 60 cut.